Alexander Graham Bell, born March 3, 1847, Edinburgh, Scotland, died August 2, 1922. Ben Bray, Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia, Canada, Scottish-born American inventor, scientist, and teacher of the deaf whose foremost accomplishments were the invention of the telephone, 1876, and the refinement of the phonograph, 1886. Alexander Graham was not added until he was 11. Was born to Alexander Melville Bell and Eliza Grace Simons. His mother was almost deaf, and his father taught elocution to the deaf, influencing Alexander's later career choice as teacher of the deaf. At age 11 he entered the Royal High School at Edinburgh, but he did not enjoy the compulsory curriculum, and he left school at age 15 without graduating. In 1865 the family moved to London. Alexander passed the entrance examinations for University College London in June 1868 and matriculated there in the autumn. However, he did not complete his studies, because in 1870 the Bell family moved again, this time immigrating to Canada after the deaths of Bell's younger brother Edward in 1867 and older brother Melville in 1870, both of tuberculosis. The family settled in Brantford, Ontario, but in April 1871 Alexander moved to Boston, where he taught at the Boston School for Deaf-Mutes. He also taught at the Clark School for the Deaf in Northampton, Massachusetts, and at the American School for the Deaf in Hartford, Connecticut. One of Bell's students was Mabel Hubbard, daughter of Gardner Green Hubbard, a founder of the Clark School. Mabel had become deaf at age 5 as a result of a near-fatal bout of scarlet fever. Bell began working with her in 1873, when she was 15 years old. Despite a 10-year age difference, they fell in love and were married on July 11, 1877. They had 4 children: Elsie, 1878 to 1964, Marianne, 1880 to 1962, and 2 sons who died in infancy. While pursuing his teaching profession, Bell also began researching methods to transmit several telegraph messages simultaneously over a single wire, a major focus of telegraph innovation at the time and one that ultimately led to Bell's invention of the telephone. In 1868 Joseph Stearns had invented the duplex, a system that transmitted 2 messages simultaneously over a single wire. Western Union Telegraph Company, the dominant firm in the industry, acquired the rights to Stearns's duplex and hired the noted inventor Thomas Edison to devise as many multiple transmission methods as possible in order to block competitors from using them. Edison's work culminated in the quadruplex, a system for sending 4 simultaneous telegraph messages over a single wire. Inventors then sought methods that could send more than 4, some, including Bell and his great rival Elisha Gray, developed designs capable of subdividing a telegraph line into 10 or more channels. These so-called harmonic telegraphs used reeds or tuning forks that responded to specific acoustic frequencies. They worked well in the laboratory but proved unreliable in service. A group of investors led by Gardner Hubbard wanted to establish a federally chartered telegraph company to compete with Western Union by contracting with the post office to send low-cost telegrams. Hubbard saw great promise in the harmonic telegraph and backed Bell's experiments. Bell, however, was more interested in transmitting the human voice. Finally, he and Hubbard worked out an agreement that Bell would devote most of his time to the harmonic telegraph but would continue developing his telephone concept. From harmonic telegraphs transmitting musical tones, it was a short conceptual step for both Bell and Gray to transmit the human voice. Bell filed a patent describing his method of transmitting sounds on February 14, 1876, just hours before Gray filed a caveat, a statement of concept, on a similar method. On March 7, 1876, the Patent Office awarded Bell what is said to be one of the most valuable patents in history. It is most likely that both Bell and Gray independently devised their telephone designs as an outgrowth of their work on harmonic telegraphy. However, the question of priority of invention between the two has been controversial from the very beginning. Despite having the patent, Bell did not have a fully functioning instrument. He first produced intelligible speech on March 10, 1876, when he summoned his laboratory assistant, Thomas A. Watson. With words that Bell transcribed in his lab notes as, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Over the next few months, Bell continued to refine his instrument to make it suitable for public exhibition. In June he demonstrated his telephone to the judges of the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition. A test witnessed by Brazil's Emperor Pedro II and the celebrated Scottish physicist Sir William Thomson. In August of that year, he was on the receiving end of the first one-way long-distance call, transmitted from Brantford to nearby Paris, Ontario, over a telegraph wire. Gardner Hubbard organized a group that established the Bell Telephone Company in July 1877 to commercialize Bell's telephone. Bell was the company's technical advisor until he lost interest in telephony in the early 1880s. Although his invention rendered him independently wealthy, he sold off most of his stock holdings in the company early and did not profit as much as he might have had he retained his shares. Thus, by the mid-1880s his role in the telephone industry was marginal. By that time, Bell had developed a growing interest in the technology of sound recording and playback. Although Edison had invented the phonograph in 1877, he soon turned his attention to other technologies, especially electric power and lighting, and his machine, which recorded and reproduced sound on a rotating cylinder wrapped in tinfoil, remained an unreliable and cumbersome device. In 1880 the French government awarded Bell the Volta Prize, given for achievement in electrical science. Bell used the prize money to set up his Volta Laboratory, an institution devoted to studying deafness and improving the lives of the deaf, in Washington, D.C. There he also devoted himself to improving the phonograph. By 1885 Bell and his colleagues, his cousin Chichester A. Bell and the inventor Charles Sumner Tainter, had a design fit for commercial use that featured a removable cardboard cylinder coated with mineral wax. They called their device the graphophone and applied for patents, which were granted in 1886. The group formed the Volta Graphophone Company to produce their invention. Then in 1887 they sold their patents to the American Graphophone Company, which later evolved into the Columbia Phonograph Company. Bell used his proceeds from the sale to endow the Volta Laboratory. Bell undertook two other noteworthy research projects at the Volta Laboratory. In 1880 he began research on using light as a means to transmit sound. In 1873 British scientist Willoughby Smith discovered that the element selenium, a semiconductor, varied its electrical resistance with the intensity of incident light. Bell sought to use this property to develop the photophone, an invention he regarded as at least equal to his telephone. He was able to demonstrate that the photophone was technologically feasible, but it did not develop into a commercially viable product. Nevertheless, it contributed to research into the photovoltaic effect that had practical applications later in the 20th century. Bell's other major undertaking was the development of an electrical bullet probe, an early version of the metal detector, for surgical use. The origin of this effort was the shooting of U.S. President James A. Garfield in July 1881. A bullet lodged in the president's back, and doctors were unable to locate it through physical probing. Bell decided that a promising approach was to use an induction balance, a byproduct of his research on cancelling out electrical interference on telephone wires. Bell determined that a properly configured induction balance would emit a tone when a metal object was brought into proximity with it. At the end of July, he began searching for Garfield's bullet. But to no avail. Despite Garfield's death in September, Bell later successfully demonstrated the probe to a group of doctors. Surgeons adopted it, and it was credited with saving lives during the Boer War, 1899–1902, and World War I, 1914–18. In September 1885, the Bell family vacationed in Nova Scotia, Canada, and immediately fell in love with the climate and landscape. The following year, Bell bought 50 acres of land near the village of Baddock on Cape Breton Island and began constructing an estate he called Ben Brae, Scots Gaelic for "beautiful mountain." The Scottish-born inventor had been an American citizen since 1882, but the Canadian estate became the family's summer retreat and later permanent home. During the 1890s, Bell shifted his attention to heavier-than-air flight. Starting in 1891, inspired by the research of American scientist Samuel Pierpont Langley, he experimented with wing shapes and propeller blade designs. He continued his experiments even after Wilbur and Orville Wright made the first successful powered, controlled flight in 1903. In 1907, Bell founded the Aerial Experiment Association, which made significant progress in aircraft design and control and contributed to the career of pioneer aviator Glenn Hammond Curtis. Throughout his life, Bell sought to foster the advance of scientific knowledge. He supported the journal Science, which later became the official publication of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He succeeded his father-in-law, Gardner Hubbard, as president of the National Geographic Society, 1898–1903. In 1903, his son-in-law, Gilbert H. Grosvenor, became editor-in-chief of the National Geographic magazine. And Bell encouraged Grosvenor to make the magazine a more popular publication through more photographs and fewer scholarly articles. Bell died at his Nova Scotia estate, where he was buried.